Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all.
Uh, Hello to everybody. I'm just looking at the list of names of attendees. I think for many of you, it's morning. I believe Brazil is very well represented here, but I see some other people that I recognize from places like South Africa. So welcome to everybody wherever you are in the world. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. And I want to just introduce the session that we're having today and hand straight over to the speakers. I think they're going to be a lot more interesting than I am. So just to, sorry, somebody seems to be unmuted, if you don't mind muting just for the moment. So today we're going to look at the World Heritage Convention in the context of other conventions. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to show a short introduction to the presentation. Let me just share my screen. There we go. So yes, I want to really discuss today this idea of using other conventions in association with the World Heritage Convention. I think that there are a lot of overlaps, and I think that by using other conventions, we really just make what we're trying to do stronger in terms of heritage management and protection, but also in terms of how we view World Heritage and how people can access World Heritage. I wanted to quickly run through, and I'm sure many of you know this, and I hope some of you attended an excellent presentation hosted by Danielle Pini yesterday regarding the criteria and the values and significance of World Heritage. But I wanted to just recap very briefly on some of the key points that I think are important when we're thinking about World Heritage. And of course, the first one is those points that come out of the convention itself and the operational guidelines and how things become World Heritage. And as I'm sure many of you know, World Heritage or sites to be included on the World Heritage list need to be of outstanding and universal value. But I'm not sure that those concepts, outstanding and universal, are really well understood by the majority of people who access or visit or live around World Heritage sites. What is outstanding and what is universal? And I think by exploring other conventions, we get a better idea of what those terms mean. Of course, World Heritage sites have to meet a list of 10 other criteria, and I've listed them here. I'm not going to go through them. There's just one that I think really stands out for me, and this is Criterion 6, which says a site needs to be or can be nominated on the fact that it's directly or tangibly associated with events or living traditions, with ideas or beliefs, with artistic and literary works of outstanding universal significance. In the convention itself and in the operational guidelines, this criteria has a bit of a caveat to it to say that this one should be used in association with others, if at all possible. And I think that's important as well. The way that we've viewed World Heritage is something that's changing. When this convention was drafted almost 50 years ago, the way that people viewed the world, the way that people viewed what heritage was and what it meant was very different to the way we view it now. I think our views of World Heritage are evolving. And as more and more people would like to gain access to World Heritage, that is evolving as well. So I think this is one of the important criteria that we really need to explore. And it's one that we can really use in order to expand our understanding and the way we access and manage World Heritage. But the speakers will get into that in a bit more detail. For me, I just wanted to run through a quick case study of why I think that this is important. And I wanted to use Mozambique Island as this case study. As you can see here, Mozambique Island, which obviously is off the coast of Mozambique, is dominated by the Portuguese fort, which was built originally in the 1500s. And behind it, you can see there's a small stone town, much like Zanzibar. And behind that is a village, a Makua village. But what happens at the World Heritage Site and the way that the World Heritage Site has been defined is dominated by this European northern end of the island. And as you get further towards the south, as you move into the Makua village, less and less of those things that might be identified with World Heritage are visible. Two criterion were used to list Mozambique Island. The first speaks to its fortifications, but also to the architecture of the Makua village, but to a lesser degree. The Portuguese influences, the Indian and Arabian influences are really visible in that stone town and in that Portuguese fort. Criterion 6, the one that we were looking at, is also important in this case because it says that this bears witness to the establishment and development of the Portuguese maritime routes between Europe and India and onto Asia. Again, I think this is something that bears looking at. Is this World Heritage? Is something that is testament to the Portuguese maritime routes truly World Heritage? Is this something that resonates, that fits those ideas of universal, that fits those ideas of being significant to everybody? So again, we'll talk about that in more detail, I think, later on. What's interesting about the nomination is in the dossier is this paragraph saying that the island communities are intimately associated with the history of navigation in the Indian Ocean. And this has occurred for a very long time, including as Europe expanded across the globe and expanded into the Indian Ocean. But what's important is that the island communities are connected with the Indian Ocean in a very significant way. And they have been for a very, very long time, long before Europeans were on the East African coast. But this is not really reflected in the World Heritage Site itself, but it could be looking at other conventions. And again, we'll discuss that in a bit more detail later. I think for us, looking at the development of World Heritage and how World Heritage is evolving into something different to what was conceived in the 1972 version of this convention. And of course, it has value, and of course, we can't change that convention. But the views of what those things mean, what those sites mean, and what those objects that are protected by that convention mean are different to different people. And I think that's important to understand as well when we're looking at World Heritage. How we view those sites, how we view the objects and the associations with those objects needs to change. We need to take different perspectives. We need to understand that different narratives are associated with these sites. The way people see those cultural sites, those monumental buildings, that fort, that stone town, and even the village has different narratives associated with it, depending on where you're coming from and how you look at those sites. So I think that's something that we need to bear in mind as well as we talk more about World Heritage and as we talk more about how we manage and identify World Heritage. And finally, there's this meaning of people. World Heritage sites don't exist on their own. They're filled with people. And a site like Mozambique Island, which is populated by Makua, by people who have come from Portugal, and many people from around the world, the way that site is accessed and the way people understand that site changes because of the people that are there. I just wanted to use one example as well to show that these are connections that are truly global, that they're not just things that exist individually at these sites, and that there are these intangible aspects that connect the sites and make those sites more significant. Mozambique Island, I believe, is more significant than just what's been identified as the World Heritage Site. And while I understand that the World Heritage Convention specifies exactly how things can become World Heritage Sites, there are deeper connections. These are much more significant and much deeper narratives that exist at these sites. And I wanted to take one example, the image that you can see at the bottom of one of the smaller forts just off the island. This fort has been built on a rock outcrop, and as you can see, it's exposed at high tide and low tide. Without getting into too much detail about the politics of the site itself, I think that that access to the site and access to the buildings associated with the site is limited to the experts and to the people who manage that site. What this means is that there's a lot of people who live at that site who have their own stories to tell. And my own work there, in having difficulty accessing those sites, I walked around the island and spoke to numerous people who offered their services as tour guides. And they took me around the site, and each one of them explained the sites and explained the buildings and explained what was going on slightly differently. And this was one of the sites that I found really interesting. Of course, there's the Portuguese narrative that we understand and that we see when we read the history of the island. But there was another narrative that underlay that. And this narrative revolved around who built this fort that you can see on this rock outcrop. And there were stories of this fort being built by ghosts, and there were stories about, of course, it being built by the Portuguese or other settlers coming in over 1,000 years. But what was interesting about this was that narrative changed, that the way people understood that fort and the island as a whole changed. The way people saw accessing that particular fort changed depending on the narrative that they associated with it. What was also interesting was that rock outcrop formed part of a story of stone dhows. And the story went that the people living on the island saw ships approaching over the horizon and asked the deity protecting the island to protect them, and if these were hostile ships, to turn them to stone, which is indeed what happened. And you can see that the shape of that rock is very much the same shape as a dhow. But what made that interesting and what made that a universal story was that we saw the same thing at other sites, at Kilwa in Tanzania, at Zanzibar, also World Heritage sites. And these associations flowed all the way up the East African coast and flowed into the Gulf and into Asia as well. So those ideas, the same story existed in slightly different forms across the entire region. So those ideas of connectivity and universalism were really reflected in the parts of this, or in some of the parts of the sites that didn't form part of what was nominated as the World Heritage Site. By providing access to these other narratives, I think we also get a better idea of how to manage these sites by involving the people that live at these sites and interact with these sites on a day-to-day basis, and really determine what these sites mean and how these sites are universal. We need to start changing the way we ask questions about how we identify World Heritage. And one of, I think, the challenges of the World Heritage Convention has been that it came out of a time. It was a convention that was developed of its time, as many of the conventions are. They're reactions to what is happening in the world of heritage. And you can see that in, and I'm also using this example. I've just come out of the meeting of states parties for the 2001 Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage. But those kinds of conventions have been drafted as a reaction to what's going on. The 2001 Convention drafted as a reaction to to treasure hunters and to people looting underwater cultural heritage. So they're not necessarily resonating with everybody who lives at those sites or accesses those sites. So when we're trying to identify what it is that we want to protect, we may want to shift the questions around. We may want to stop going to those sites and saying, this is what's important, this is what you should know. And instead asking, what is it that you want us to know? What is it about these sites that make them universal? How do you connect these sites to these sites in the same way that somebody would connect to a similar site in South America or North America, Europe, Asia, or in the Pacific Islands? What do you want us to know? What are the the real significances, the values that come out of these sites. So these island communities, again, are connected to the Indian Ocean in a way that that hasn't really been explored in the World Heritage Site. And the challenge with this is that the heritage associated with those connections lies in the waters around the island. It lies in the narratives of the people that live on the island. And we tend to ignore that when we're thinking about World Heritage. Again, I must stress that the World Heritage Convention is very specific in what it does, and it has value in what it does. But what I'd like us to think about in the course of this webinar, and as we go over this month of new approaches to World Heritage, is this idea of using more than just the World Heritage Convention in the way that we view these sites, in the way that we manage these sites, and in the way that we identify these sites. And there's a bouquet of heritage conventions that have been specifically designed to protect or to manage or to access a particular element within heritage. And I think we need to examine more closely how we use those things together, how we put those conventions together and take a cross-conventional approach to the way that we manage World Heritage. And I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to use that as an introduction and go over to the main speakers who will, I think, give you a much deeper understanding of this cross-conventional approach. And first up, I want to introduce Guo Zhan. He's the senior researcher at the Department of Cultural Heritage Protection at the State Administration of Cultural Heritage in the People's Republic of China. And I went very briefly through his extensive CV, and I won't go through all of it with you today, but I really am honored that he agreed to take part in this session. He was elected vice president of ICOMOS in 2005 and has done extensive work in China in particular with the World Heritage Convention. I was looking at his CV. When he started working with this convention, China had no World Heritage sites, and partly due to his input, now has 31 or possibly more at this stage. I may have an older CV. So yes, again, I want to say how honored we are to have him here and hand directly over to him for his presentation.
Hello, may I? Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jonas. Hi, good everybody. My best regard to all of you. Here in Beijing, it's 9:30 p.m. So from here, I should say the good evening. I'm delighted to be part of this important international event called the Our World Heritage Initiative. At a time when the World Heritage cause is facing a complicated situation, the positive significance and potential impact of this activity will be huge and far-reaching. I would like to thank my international colleagues, including my old friend, Mr. Christian Cameron, Mr. Francesco Bandrin, Mr. Jean-Louis Luxang, and Monica for inviting and assisting me to join this honored group. I'm sorry and forgive me, please. I'm not good at using the computer to participate in online meetings, so I didn't prepare a PPT. Maybe next time, but not today. So I can only read out the short text I prepared. I'll try to be as clear as possible. As I'm not so familiar with the formal process of this event, maybe my topic, speaking today, maybe not very feasible to your topic, but I'm trying to my best. I have noticed that you, my dear colleagues, have already done a series of fruitful works. Here I'm at the second event of the month's program, the session 2, heritage categories and consulting approach among the conventions starts. One comment I would like to contribute to this discussion is about the differences, connections, and adherence to the concept of authenticity between different categories of cultural heritage. As we all know, the World Heritage Convention embodies the intersection and the entanglement of two basic rules. I think the two essential lines, two aspects. On the one hand, it is based on the long-term development of human cognition and conservation philosophy on cultural and natural heritage, based on the international consensus formed in this development process and the specific situation of each country, but also always accompanied by new problems, the new exploration and discussion. On the other hand, it also reflects the international cooperation in the field of heritage recognition and protection, and is a platform for intergovernmental cooperation in the world. There is not only cooperation, but also the peer and the influence of the interests of various countries. These two aspects, I think the two fundamental lines, make the World Heritage course in the development process sometimes appear confused and even contradictory. This is a big and complex topic that may not what we could talk fully about today. So what we are talking about today, I think, may be the professional question of cultural heritage and of course, the relationship between the professional baseline and the intergovernmental political baseline. However, I would like to focus on the very old issue of heritage authenticity between different cultural heritage categories and the relevant conventions, which has always been at the heart of the controversy. I have a feeling that the World Heritage Convention, which came into being in 1972, set the subject of this convention as the immovable material cultural heritage. And at the same time, it is good to pay attention to the intangible cultural heritage. Therefore, while defining the cognitive standards and the protection rules for the material cultural heritage, intangible aspects are also involved to some extent. Criterion 6 and the Criterion 7 of the World Heritage Values criteria have more or less this implication. Of course, as human subjective consciousness, all standards of value themselves can be said to be intangible. But most standards need to be based on real, complete material objects. In the case of cultural heritage between the Criterion 6 may be less rigorous in requiring a material basis. That is my point. In practice, when people pay attention to place spirit and emotion, they will find the dilemma of same place, different memories. One of my Australian colleagues told me that the Patachitra also refers to Criterion 6 of the World Heritage Criteria for social values. It's certainly a big topic. In the process of the development of world heritage, the status of intangible cultural heritage has also been clearly raised about the heritage of cultural roots a special category. Similarly, in the 1994 NALA document on authenticity, there is also the intersection of tangible and intangible cultural heritage and cultural diversity. Some of my friends, my colleagues, does not agree with me with this point, as he thinks that the NALA document is all about authenticity, not intangible culture nor cultural diversity. But the whole NALA document is there, and it does talk to a large extent about the intangible culture, about cultural diversity, including aspects of authenticity as defined in the NALA document, form and design, material and substance, use and function, tradition techniques and management systems, location and setting, language and other forms of intangible heritage, spirit and feelings and other internal and external factors. Among them, the last clauses clearly put forward the element of intangible heritage. However, in the World Heritage Nomination Preparing Manual, jointly developed by the advisory bodies and the World Heritage Center, the authenticity still emphasized the authenticity related to material existence. Both the World Heritage Convention and the NALA documents rightly focus on the intangible cultural factors associated with the physical heritage. But at the same time, I think they have not systematically solved the problem of coordination between the tangible and the cultural heritage and the intangible. This situation has undergone a major and essential change since the creation of two systematic documents, the 2003 Convention on Intangible Cultural Heritage and the 2005 Convention on Cultural Diversity. It also involves approaches for the recognition and the preservation of the so-called dead and living cultural heritage. It seems needed and necessary to launch a review, identification, and the integration of different conventions in the field of heritage protection after the formation of the last two conventions, 2003, 2005. They apply to different objects, goals, related attributes, laws, principles, and practices should be observed are also different. At the same time, there is a close relationship between them, and sometimes they will transform each other. If the logical relationship is not clarified in time, without distinction, without integration, in practice, there will be more endless debate and the difficulties. Because cultural heritage can be identified as the largest objective value, or its value as a historical material witness, as the documental value of the monument. All other values are derived from the fact that they exist. Time cannot be turned back. Heritage monument and site cannot be regenerated. Heritage exists in the world as a work of art, and its basic attributes are artistry and historicity. It must be materially real, and is the existence and witness of the whole process of history since it was created. Intangible cultural heritage is also faced with a deep discussion and the exploration of authenticity. The identification and the protection of intangible cultural heritage can already be addressed in the 2003 Convention and the representative list of the intangible heritage of humanity system. However, the definition and the protection of living heritage, such as historic towns and villages, is a complex social coordination behavior. So I think, as I'm not so familiar with the process, so I think I could stop here. I briefly express my concerns and views as above. Thank you again. Okay, that's my speech.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to go straight on to Harriet, and we can discuss that later. I must say I really like the idea of same place, different memories, and what that is in terms of authenticity. But we can discuss that in the discussion more generally. So in introducing Harriet, I've known Harriet for a very long time. I was trying to think back this afternoon when we first met, and I don't remember. It's been many, many years. She's currently a visiting research fellow at Coventry University, but when I knew her, was the head of research at Robben Island World Heritage Site, an extremely complex World Heritage Site. I don't know if she's going to talk about it today at all, but it's a job that I don't wish on anybody. She got a PhD in history and a MSc in intellectual property law, and has consulted extensively with UNESCO on capacity building and implementation of the Intangible Heritage Convention. So I think I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. She's going to talk about beyond World Heritage, concepts of culture and heritage in different UNESCO conventions.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Yes, I also don't remember when we first met, but thank you for inviting me onto the panel. And I'm very honored to be on the panel with Professor Jean, who I pretty much agree with. So I feel like I'm just going to be building on what he said, and perhaps then the debate will be about how to do what we both feel is necessary. Because my background comes really from intangible heritage, I'm going to be speaking about bringing a cross-cutting approach from the perspective of intangible heritage, and drawing a bit on my experience also at Robben Island Museum, but also thinking about some new work, thinking back on some new work I've been doing that kind of looks at the intersections between Intangible Heritage Convention and the Cultural Diversity Convention, looking at questions of commercialization and products. So I'm really going to look at some of the tensions and synergies in doing what Gurjan talked about as developing systematic coordination, and what conceptual work needs to be done in order to do that. I think that if one looks at the three conventions that Professor Jean mentioned, 72, 2003, and 2005, what I think is really important, not just how they are structured and how they organize their conceptual frameworks, but also where is their focus. And so this question of the historic fabric being the center focus of the 72 convention, practice and knowledge being the center focus of the Intangible Heritage Convention, and cultural products and the value chain being the center of the 2005 convention. It's hugely important, I think, to always reflect on that and to talk about how that brings differences with it that you can't always control when you're thinking about cross-cutting approaches. So where are you sitting when you say we want a cross-cutting approach? Are you sitting in a World Heritage Site? Then that changes the conversation. So I'm going to talk about three different issues. I'm going to talk about how intangible heritage has been conceptualized, both in the 2003 convention and in the World Heritage environment. I'm going to touch on this issue that was already raised about authenticity and value. And there I'll mention a bit of the work we've been doing on commercial value, which I think is interesting in terms of thinking about what it takes to get a cross-cutting approach. And then I'm going to talk about management strategies and how the World Heritage and Intangible Heritage approaches to management are actually coming together quite nicely at the moment, in my view. So, so there have been a number of attempts to look for integrated management models. The historic urban landscapes recommendation is a good one, I think, that tries to bring together environmental management, world heritage approaches, and intangible heritage management. And this question is becoming increasingly important because you have a lot of the elements now, just as an example, on the intangible heritage lists that are associated with World Heritage sites. This is a graph showing all the different elements over time, starting weirdly on the left with 2020. And in these sites where you might have a vineyard as a cultural landscape on the World Heritage List, and then you might have practices that are inscribed on the Intangible Heritage Lists in the same space, it's very important to consider what integrated management actually looks like, and how do you balance the competing approaches and not always complementary strategies that one needs to put in place. And I think this can be nicely illustrated, for example, by looking at two inscriptions in the Netherlands. The one focused on the crafts of the miller on the ICH representative list in 2017, and the other one focusing on the mills themselves. And I think what interests me about this is that you have different priorities in these two inscriptions for whether where your focus is. Is your focus on the millers making the mill work, or is your focus on the mills being in workable condition? And these are actually two slightly different things. And I think it illustrates some of the tensions between where you're sitting when you ask, how can we integrate these two approaches? So if we look at the challenges to moving towards integrated management, I think we have to start with the conceptual challenges. And what really struck me, having worked in World Heritage, and Robben Island was inscribed on the basis of Criterion 6 and 3, then seeing how the conversation in the Intangible Heritage Convention was actually quite different. And so the Intangible Heritage Convention really focuses on cultural practices and skills, traditional knowledge, and cultural spaces are sort of the environment in which some of that would happen. But in the World Heritage arena, often one's talking about actually sometimes quite different things, memories or documents, oral histories, spirit of place, intangible heritage values. And these use the same words, but they actually don't mean the same thing. And I think that's been one of the central challenges in getting some sort of conversation going between the two. I'm not going to go through the definition of ICH in the convention, 2003 convention, but essentially it's practices and skills and materials and spaces are treated as context, important context, but nevertheless context. And it's pretty much the other way around in World Heritage, where you're sitting in a World Heritage site and then you're asking, what is the ICH associated with this site? And particularly intangible heritage in the World Heritage Convention, as Professor Zhao said, is seen as an attribute that helps to define authenticity in an outstanding universal value. So it's an attribute. And I think that difficulty about how to understand the relationship between intangible heritage and World Heritage sites has led to, I think, a lack of coordination between the approaches in the two conventions. I was, however, particularly excited to see this practice note on intangible cultural heritage that was developed by Australia ICOMOS 2017, that really started moving the concept of intangibles into the World Heritage space in a way that I recognize coming from the ICH Convention. And particularly thinking about it as cultural practices that are associated with a site, and pointing out that all values are in fact intangible. So significance, when we're talking about intangible heritage, we're not talking about significance of sites. We're actually talking about cultural practices in the site or associated with the site. You see this filtering through a little bit in the draft ICOMOS Charter on ICH, which is still under discussion. There was a meeting in Australia, I think earlier this year, that builds on the Tiemanning Declaration 2007. And, you know, where this borrows from the ICH Convention is, as Jonathan was pointing out, the community emphasis has been there since the Tiemanning Declaration was first drafted, I think, back in 2001. But the draft ICOMOS Charter actually, you know, starts going a little bit further. And the upgrades of the Tiemanning Declaration also go a little bit further on community custodianship, consent, decision-making, on authenticity, and so on. And this very much focuses on the indivisibility of tangible and intangible, but it focuses on intangible heritage associated with sites only. So again, this is about your perspective. Where are you in a World Heritage site? And you're asking yourself, where's the intangible heritage around me? There is a commentary. It hasn't quite gone as far as the practice note of 2017 on moving away from thinking about intangible heritage as intangible values. And this has actually been critiqued by the NSC ICH in Australia ICOMOS. So they've critiqued the draft ICOMOS Charter and pointed out that intangible values are not appropriate. They've asked them to remove references to authenticity, and I've also suggested perhaps emphasizing possible broadening of scope to include ICH that is no longer alive. In other words, it's no longer practiced. And I think that those critiques of the draft ICOMOS Charter are quite interesting. I don't actually agree that references to authenticity have to be removed, and I'll come back to that later. I think it's very important to distinguish between intangible practice and intangible value. Although the 2003 convention focuses on ICH that is currently being practiced, I think it's a great idea to also think about ICH that is no longer being practiced, but perhaps could be revived to renovate a site or to maintain a building. It could be documented. There are many things that could be done. And I think it's a bit of a pity that the ICH Convention doesn't think enough about history. And I'd like us to talk a little bit about that, because I think this idea of witness to history is a very interesting one that Professor Jean mentioned. So I'll come to now why I think authenticity is important to start talking about in the ICH Convention, and how this can lead to a better relation with the World Heritage debates. We already heard about NARA and the authenticity issue. And I think that, you know, what's interesting to me is how the NARA document is being used also to justify community identification of significance by the idea that cultural heritage must be considered and judged primarily within the cultural contexts to which it belongs. But I think this is quite ironic in a way, because when I looked at the NARA document, my feeling was that there was a slippage between a cultural context being framed as a national cultural context and a cultural context being framed as a local community context. So it's interesting to see that the NARA document is now being interpreted in the second way to kind of justify a bottom-up approach. And you can see this in the draft ICOMOS Charter on ICH, and really, I think, moving quite close to the ethical principles of the 2003 convention, which emphasize community control, consent, and so on. And it's no surprise this is coming also from the Australian environment, where Indigenous management of World Heritage sites has been a big step forward. The notion of authenticity is very intriguing to me, because there, as Jean was saying, that there has been a big debate in the 2003 convention about whether it's a useful concept or not. And it's really central to whether a site speaks to, or how a site speaks to, outstanding universal value. And so this idea of intangible heritage being an attribute that expresses outstanding universal value, I think it could be a practice in the site that could speak to an outstanding universal value. It doesn't necessarily have to be an intangible value in order to be seen as an attribute. So I don't really have a problem with the way in which intangible heritage is being used here, as long as we're not confusing intangible heritage practice and significance. There was a lot of concern about the term authenticity in the 2003 convention, because there was this idea of it being externally imposed authenticity. And that's why the ethical principles of the 2003 convention say authenticity and exclusivity should not constitute concerns and obstacles in the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. And the idea is that community members may want to talk about what they want to transmit between the generations. They might want to talk about what for them is a practice that is in line with their traditional practice and what is not. But other people shouldn't come and say so, you know, externally. And so there has been a real reluctance to talk about authenticity at all in the framework of the 2003 convention, at the same time as many of the nomination files that come to the committee actually mention authenticity from the community point of view. And we actually cannot, in my view, we actually cannot really talk sensibly about safeguarding unless we talk a little bit about authenticity. And I just want to give you a few insights from a project we've been doing in India on heritage sensitive intellectual property and marketing strategies to explain how I think we can start talking about authenticity in the 2003 convention framework. So the HIPAMS, which is this project, the HIPAMS project was intended to really start thinking about the relationship between heritage practice and commercial products. And so looking at the border between the 2005 convention and the 2003 convention. And there were 4 issues that we felt needed to be on the table that were generally discussed very little in the 2003 convention framework. And they were community governance and empowerment, heritage skills repertoire, reputation, and heritage sensitive innovation. And those are the 4, what we call the HIPAMS canvas. They're the 4 planning issues that we felt were needed in order to think about how communities can, engage more proactively with the market without damaging the possibility of safeguarding the heritage. I won't go into a lot of detail. I can put the link in the chat. But one of the tools that we looked at was what we call the roots and fruits tool, where we looked at basically the roots of the tradition, which are really heritage attributes. And what we did was we really looked at, we interviewed the community members and they discussed it amongst themselves. What for us are the things that we really value about this tradition? What do we want to pass on to the next generation? And what does that, what significance also does that have for us? And then from a fruits perspective, what actual products are we producing? Whether those are for sale or not for sale, it didn't matter. But what is the tangible product then of the roots of the growing process? And so this model helped us to think a little bit about, let's say, heritage attributes in relation to intangible heritage. And this was one of the comments from one of the Baal singers who we worked with in the performance art community, which was really about the soil that's needed to make the roots strong and to bear good fruits. The other concept that we started talking about, and I think this is very important for thinking about the relationship between intangible heritage also and tangible heritage, is we talked not about whether a product itself was authentic, but to what extent the heritage skills repertoire, the repertoire to make traditional products, continued in the community or was able to continue in the community. And so by getting away from this idea of a fabric authenticity to the ability of the roots to grow a fruit of various kinds, we helped to then broaden the conversation away from authenticity as a property of a product, and to think more about repertoire. And we used, in order to understand the repertoire, we actually did a little exercise on mapping of skills. How many people in the community can do this particular craft technique? How many people can do that thing that's being lost, and so on, as a way of sort of visualizing repertoire. And this is quite an important, I think, insight when we think about how are we going to move forward bringing tangible and intangible process, heritage management together in a practical way and thinking about managing significance. So I think in both the World Heritage environment and in the intangible heritage environment, one can think about attributes feeding into a significance statement, and then you're managing significance. All significance is intangible values, but the practices are the intangible heritage, and the tangible heritage is historic fabric. We all know there's been a kind of shift away from simply preventing decay in historic fabric towards a much more sophisticated approach in managing significance. And sometimes that significance is defined by experts. Increasingly in World Heritage, there's sensitivity to multiple significances and management of that also by communities and defining the significance by communities. So I think that there's been a lot of shift in the World Heritage model of heritage management, you know, way back from the Borough Charter. In intangible heritage management, there's not been a lot of discussion about models until fairly recently. And I was intrigued to see a very interesting article on lomi noodle making in the Philippines that tries to combine the Borough Charter approach with the intangible heritage approach and to look at significance and a statement of significance in the safeguarding of a noodle tradition in the Philippines. If anyone's keen on the reference, I'll put that in the chat. And the methodology that they used was a kind of heritage assessment coupled with an economic assessment. Because this is a product for sale, then a statement of significance, threats and risks, safeguarding measures, and safeguarding plan. And to me, this was intriguing because it was really a practical example. I don't know how successful the actual plan has been, but bringing together the various models. In UNESCO, and I must admit I'm partially responsible for this, there has been an attempt to think about significance management in relation to intangible heritage, where you look at the significance of the ICH element, look at its attributes, identify threats and risks, and then look at safeguarding measures to address those risks. And that is now being used as a kind of safeguarding model in the ICH convention. But there's not been a lot of stress testing of it. I think it needs to be worked on and improved. And cross-cutting experiences with World Heritage are part of that. And so just as a final remark, I'd like to say that what I've noticed in the Intangible Heritage Convention is that it started off trying to be very far away from the World Heritage Convention. And in its first few decades, it has tried to distance itself from World Heritage. But increasingly what I'm seeing is it's starting to borrow ideas back, not just in terms of thinking about significance, but also perhaps in thinking about the listing mechanisms and how those the adjudication of nominations to the lists. I think where the Intangible Heritage Convention has contributed is a much bigger focus on community and community definitions of what is heritage value. And so that's something that's gone the other way. There still is not enough discussion around economic value and how you think about economic value in relation to these three conventions. So I think for me, that's a space where we really need further work. I'll stop sharing there. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, Harriet. That's really interesting and very thorough. And I think coming out of both of those, well, I'm going to ask the big question in a second about how do we now do this. But I think underlying both of those presentations was this idea of authenticity and what it is, and that there's no real common dictionary of authenticity between the conventions. I don't know if there's a solution to that. Is this fundamentally different? Is that authenticity fundamentally different in tangible and intangible heritage? And beyond that, into other conventions, I'm thinking of things like the Underwater Cultural Heritage Convention. What constitutes underwater cultural heritage in terms of that convention? That it's purely determined by age, that significance and authenticity is determined by how long it's sat underwater or partially underwater. Is there a way to bring all of those different ideas of what is authentic and what authenticity is together? And I'm opening that up to both of you.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I suppose the idea of authenticity to me is whether the attributes somehow speak to the significance, and whether that's defined by a community or whether it's defined by somebody else doesn't matter so much in terms of understanding the concept of it. Obviously, each element of ICH, or even over time, the judgment of what is authentic will change within the community. And I mean, the same is true of World Heritage. But I feel like the term itself has become the problem in regard to the Intangible Heritage Convention is not just who defines authenticity, it's that it's often linked as an attribute of a thing. And what we've been trying to do is to say that authenticity really resides in the repertoire, in the ability to create something that ticks the boxes for the community. Whether that's a ritual or whether it's a handicraft or whatever it is, or whether it's a particular kind of dance.
Gurjan, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I think that the authenticity on one hand is the relative authenticity, because, for example, today's me is not me in yesterday. So should something change. But the relatively there are the authenticity with the associated with the material heritage. That is why I think the most important for the 1972 convention is most important is the authenticity. And the authenticity in China, we have the serious debate in the past years. Some people said in the Chinese law, we thought when we make the restoration, the protection works should be follow the principle as the restore the old as it was the old. But what means the old is a different opinion. Some people think about that the old one, the original state, we call the original state should be the when he just at the beginning, when it had been created. Some people said the original state should be the state during the process when it was the most flourish, the best state. So, but in my view, I think authenticity should for the whole process of the historical development process. It's from the creation come to now when the people recognized and designated it as the protected unit. So I think this is also for the Blandi or some international colleagues that is the monument. The first one is artistic attribute. The second one is the historic attribute. This means from the creation come to now, the whole process, all the patina, all the traces of the historical traces, together with the monument, it should be the whole, the authenticity for the whole. But for the intangible heritage, I think there is still the problem. If we say that no concept of the authenticity with the intangible heritage, but how do we say it is the heritage? Heritage should something from some historical context. But if we say the authenticity should be associated with the intangible heritage, it's difficult to judge what is the authenticity for that. So I think that is still the question we should discuss in depth. So, but when we are talking about to integrate the two conventions, 2003 and 1972. Some people, I find that some colleagues, they tend to make some intangible heritage to be the tangible heritage. It's the problem. That is, I'm very worried about the World Heritage Convention and the World Heritage List is becoming something sometimes is a little bit confused. That's my opinion.
Thanks. I want to, at this point, just ask if some of the others who are in the panelist list could assist me with the questions or the comments that are coming in. Unfortunately, I can't see them on my screen, if you don't mind. And before we get to that, I think, bearing in mind I'm an underwater archaeologist, and a lot of this is quite foreign to me. But the idea, especially with intangible heritage, of selecting something or some point in that, as you've just mentioned, to say this is what it is and drawing a line under it. For me, that idea of intangible heritage and those traditions, they're constantly evolving, and I guess it's the same with world heritage, that we choose a time and say this is the pinnacle of what happened here, or with intangible heritage saying this is the bit that we want to record. Does that mean that the rest of it doesn't matter? And how do we integrate those into that narrative as well? And both of you have pointed out that idea of community and where those narratives perhaps rest, and how to collect all of that and how to put that into the grand narrative of a World Heritage Site or a piece of intangible heritage. I don't know if that is something that we can do, or do we as experts have to say this is what we think is important?
Well, if I can just tell a brief story of what happened with our India project, is that the idea of identifying attributes doesn't mean that that's forever, that you would that's it. You know, there wouldn't be any more attributes. It's just saying, look, if this is important to you as a community or as artists of a particular heritage practice, what do you think are the important features of that you would want your children or the next generation of artists to know and to be able to do? And that's and how does that, so then those attributes are really the skills repertoire that people are really valuing. And it doesn't close the door to other things. It's just saying, well, we feel that that's the most important. And so we were working with a group of artists doing Patachitra Art, which is a sort of storytelling on sari scrolls, sari backed paper scrolls. And the artist said, look, the singing associated with these scrolls is really important to us, as the whole idea of the tradition is that you would sing the story of the scroll as you showed it to people. And because the scrolls themselves had become products that would be sold, a lot of the time they were being sold and taken away without the story being sung. And so by identifying the importance of the song in the attributes, it really made it possible to move forward and start including the song as a part of the product. So then we printed QR codes, and we helped the artists to set up websites where the video recordings of the songs could be linked to the scrolls permanently through the packaging and the QR codes. So And I found it interesting that they said to us they hadn't actually been talking to their customers about what it was that was important to them about their heritage art. So for them it was important, but they hadn't actually been communicating that to their customers. And so that they started doing that once we did this attributes exercise a lot more. And for me, that was quite interesting because we, they said, well, we just took it for granted. We kind of thought everyone knew that this was important. And then some people did, of course, amongst their customers, but a lot didn't.
Gurjan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, Johnson, thank you. I found that there are some very important new ideas, new concepts for the world heritage. One called the people-centered, one called the value-based, value-centered conservation. I think all of them are right. It's a very good idea as the 5C strategy of the World Heritage Convention. It's the community, communication, all of them I think is necessary and very important. But I think there are the different issues, different problems. When we talk about the authenticity, it refers to the 72 convention said the heritage attributes, the nature, the significance. I think it's different with the intangible. When we talk the people-centered or value-centered conservation, it means how do we promote, how do we mobilize the movement of the conservation? One is the nature, the attributes of the world heritage. Another one is how do we preserve, how do we mobilize the public and to promote the awareness to all the people and to involve all the stakeholders to come to protect them. I think it's a different issue. So I think all of them are right, but it's we don't need to make them mixed or confused. This is the problem, I think. Thank you.
Would you like us to answer the questions in the chat, Jonathan? There are a few coming through.
Yes, please, if you can see them. As I say, my screen is a little blurred for some as it dies.
Okay.
I can see the first question.
Okay, well, I'll read them out in case anyone can't see them. The first question is from Christina Cameron, talking about certain delistings on from the World Heritage List, if they're not appropriate interventions, and asking whether such guidance exists for ICH and whether some ICH could be judged unacceptable at the international level. Yes, in the convention, Article 2.1 excludes ICH that's not compatible with human rights, mutual respect, and sustainable development. And so at the moment, only one element has been delisted. And that happened in Bogota at the committee meeting, I think it was last year, where a carnival in Belgium that had some, let's say, racially inappropriate floats was delisted because it didn't comply with mutual respect. What was, I think, withdrawn from the list was the actual mechanism. So yes, there's definitely, and most of the issues that so far have been on the table on the list have been actually about animal rights rather than human rights or mutual respect between humans. But it's certainly quite a hot topic. I don't know if Professor Jean wants to add to that. And then the other question was from Ritika Khanna, and it was, since World Heritage is old and has been the subject of much research, there's a lot of frameworks and guiding answers and guiding frameworks for concepts like authenticity, but not much yet exists for the ICH convention since it's relatively new. So the need of the hour is increased critical inquiry on the ICH convention and its overlapping factors with World Heritage. I do agree with some of that. I think that it's a very new field and ideas are being really discussed all the time at the moment. So I think there are many areas where the ICH convention needs to develop a more sophisticated approach. At the same time, I think that simply because there's been so much time and effort on trying to refine the World Heritage Convention over the last 40 years, what I see looking at it from the outside is a lot of inconsistencies still in the texts. So the operational guidelines are not, using intangible heritage in the same way as some of the other new texts associated with World Heritage. So obviously the way things change is to have external bodies like ECOMOS or whatever making suggestions, but the actual texts and the guidelines I think are still quite out of date and inconsistent for World Heritage, whereas because intangible heritage is a bit newer, we haven't had as much time to create those inconsistencies yet.
Thank you very much for taking on the reading of the questions as well. More than we should ask for you, I guess. I think perhaps we should wrap it up there. I would urge everybody to join the next session starting soon. I think I can post the links in the chat. And to say thank you to both of the panelists. I think increasingly there's a complexity to heritage that is emerging. And as these conventions address various aspects of heritage, we need to look more closely at their overlaps. We tend to, certainly in underwater cultural heritage, we tend to look at landscape approaches, and I know that that's happening in world heritage as well. And if that is the case, those multiple elements that make up a landscape are the same elements that make up heritage more generally. And the idea of separating one element from another element is becoming increasingly, I believe, incongruous. So finding these ways and these overlaps between the conventions, seeing how they work together and seeing how we can deploy them as I said at the beginning of the presentations, as a bouquet of management tools and of identification tools. The more we can do that, the more integrated and the more accessible heritage becomes. So again, thank you to both the panelists for all of your time and for really fascinating presentations. For me, this is really at the heart of heritage and everything that we do as heritage managers, as archaeologists, as historians. So thank you for your insights, and thank you to all of the attendees for coming to listen to us. And I hope that we will see you in the upcoming presentations. And I hope that we'll hear a lot more from Harriet and Gu. So thank you very much to everybody, and yeah, from our side, goodbye and see you soon.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily